Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon theory crafting session, I guess. So I kind of started doing this with Applemon, and it seemed like a pretty interesting concept of a video to try to pursue, so here is another one. So I don't know how many of these I'm going to be doing. Again, none of these decks are going to be like super tested. So these are just my thoughts and impressions on how I would go about building the deck. And then obviously after this initial build is where you'd go to, play test the deck, see what's working, see what's not, start changing it up depending on the type of information you're getting through your playtesting sessions. So I think that today I'm going to be doing Galacticmon. One of my friends was interested in the deck, so I thought I'd give it a try. I'm not a huge Galacticmon expert, but I know who is. I think as far as a conceptual level, this is probably a good place to start. So usually when I go deck building, I don't want to try to reinvent the wheel if I don't have to. So we already have a successful build. This is Leechy's build. It's basically his deck from the EX8 format. So it's pretty comparable to what we already have, and obviously we're going to be getting a lot of new tools in BT21, which is the most exciting part. So when I go to deck building, again, not trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm going to be using his topping list as my base or foundation, and then kind of just editing from there. So kind of just going off of what he had. Obviously, we have a new Galacticmon, so we probably are just going to start off by taking out the old Galacticmon and putting in the new Galacticmon. Then, with the new Galacticmon, we do need to find space for his option. So, Final Zubagon Punch kind of just always felt like a tech card, just to try to make Galacticmon actually deal some damage and have some decent DP. I think that's a little bit less relevant because of the new tech that it's working with. So we could probably take that out, play some of the new option. So if anyone's actually unfamiliar with the new Galacticmon, when we digivolve up into him, we get to throw 4 Vemmons from our trash underneath him, and then we get to use a Ragnarok cannon from our hand or trash for free. So that's the big important distinction point, is the fact that it can be from our trash. So we're going to be using Ragnarok Cannon to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with the lowest play cost, then put this onto the battlefield, and then when one of our Galacticmon attacks, we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with the lowest play cost, and if it didn't delete anything, then we get to trash the top cards of the opponent's security stack until they only have 1 card left. So this is a really powerful, like, 1-2 punch combo that we're going to be using in combination with the Snatchmons, because the Snatchmons have the ability to give us an unsuspend, so that way we could basically swing with Galacti, use the cannon to be able to delete all of the opponent's security, unsuspend our Digimon, and then that one check is going to go through, and then because our Digimon's unsuspended, we could swing for the game. And ideally, because we used Ragnarok Cannon to delete their Digimon, they reasonably shouldn't have anything on their field to be able to stop or prevent us from doing that. So that's kind of like the whole idea and gimmick of how the new Galacti wants to work. So as far as leveraging some of the new tools, we're probably going to have to cut down a little bit on the Vemmon counts. I know that Leechy was trying to play around with the numbers to see, like, what's the precise number of Vemmons that actually is correct. So we'll first start off by reducing him by 4, so that way we could put 4 of the new Vemmon in. So the new Vemmon is actually a really insane card because it just gives us more access at recursion. So by ditching a Vemmon, so we still want to have a high Vemmon count, we get to basically return any Vemmon texted card from our trash to our hand, which is basically all of our Digimon, our Fusionize, our Tamers, and I think, no, it's not the option. It's basically everything but the option. Which is really good levels of recursion, especially since the deck has ways to be able to fill up its trash pretty effectively. I do think we still kind of need the new Zenith, because the new Zenith is not only a memory setter, but it's also a consistency tool at the same time, and it's helping fill up our trash as well. So there's a lot of upsides to running him, but because he is a memory setter, we probably aren't going to be running any more than 2 of them. And to fit in some space, because obviously right now we're a little on the overcount side, we're going to at least to take out one of the old Zenith. So that way we still see at least one of the old Zenith per game, which is still going to be really important and impactful. I think if we are going to try to squeeze in some of the new cards, unfortunately, some of the old cards are going to have to go. So I think like because Shadow Seraphimon isn't searchable and it isn't recursive, we could probably take that out to play the new Destromon. So the new Destromon is absolutely an insane card. Not only is it de-digivolving the opponent's Digimon to get them into a weaker state or just completely mess up their game plan, but the important thing about this card is it's adding some borderline unparalleled levels of protection, so that way your Galacticmon is guaranteed to stick around. So that's the big distinction point on what this card is doing more specifically. Then if it ever were to die, it basically replaces itself, which is never a bad thing. Especially since we have more varied Vemmons that we could use to be able to do kind of just whatever we want with. Especially the new Vemmon, which allows us to be able to recur a part. So the best cards that we're probably going to be recurring is obviously the Destromon and the Galacticmon. So those are going to be the 2 primary targets that we're going to want to recur. Also, the Digicross on the Snatchmon is also another really good card we would want to recur, because that way we could have the extra Vemmon that we played off of the Destromon to be able to go into a Snatchmon and then do all the fancy schmancy stuff from there. So we already are starting to flesh out what this newer iteration of Galacticmon is doing. So we kind of want to just look at some of the other tools that we have available. So the new Egg is a really powerful card, but I do think, again, this will come down to playtesting to see how we can make this card work, because it feels like this card's kind of insane, having a plus 3000 DP during all turns. But we do have to have 4 or more Vemmons in our Digivolution source, and then the only caveat is half the time we're removing our Vemmons, so it just doesn't feel like it's going to be synergizing all too well, but it's still a really good card to like put on the back burner, sit and think about, and then potentially play test with. So I still think for the way the deck works, the Dorimon, just for the active draw and consistency, is probably still better, since based on Leechy's previous list, he really wasn't running a whole lot of like consistency tools. So usually the idea is if we're taking something out, we're going to be putting a consistency tool in its place. But because of the way this deck works, it's super reliant on having and using our Vemmons effective and efficiently. So like I'm struggling to kind of find ways to add in the new Snatchmon. I do think like compared to everything else that the deck is doing, I think Snatchmon is arguably one of the worst cards. I'm using the word worst loosely. It's still a very good card. The top half of the card, being able to, again, have more consistency is always a good thing, while also being able to fill up and use our trash is also, again, still very relevant. Then on top of that, the inheritable ability isn't too shabby either at just being able to help delete some of the opponent's low-level Digimon, especially since we have lots of ways to de-digivolve in the deck, so that way we could actually try to, use Ragnarok Cannon for its actual intended purpose on basically OTKing the opponent. So the only real space I see myself feeling comfortable with is probably just cutting out 2 more Vemmons just to run 2 more Snatchmons. So that way we have some extra Snatchmons to coincide with the extra Destromons to try to fill up our curve a little bit. I don't necessarily think we need 4 Galacticmons, just because, again, the principle on running a card at the quantity of 3 is we only realistically need to see it once per game. So that kind of fits the bill, since especially we have a new recursive tool to be able to grab it. So it's not like seeing it once per game is that detrimental. we do have ways to be able to bring it back and reuse it. And ideally, because of the new Destromon, it's not going to try to leave the field while still giving us all of the offensive and defensive potential that Galacticmon is kind of just known for. But that's kind of it for like a solid base or foundational build. And again, you're probably going to want to go through and play test this to figure out what iterations and improvements could be made to this. But when it comes to those iterations and improvements, it's mostly just looking at what other options you probably would want. We were running a Shadow Seraphi Ace before, or at least Lychee was running a Shadow Seraphi Ace before, with the Destromon having some really good protections. It's not like running an ace is unreasonable, so we would just probably take a look at what ace options that we actually have available to us. So we're probably not going to want to run any of the level 5 aces. We're most likely just going to want to stick to level 6 aces. And we got a lot of decent options to work with here. So we have Vikemon, we have Shadow Seraphimon, we have Metal Seadramon. Those are probably going to be like the best three. We do have Mega Gargamon. That's not a terrible one either. So we do have plenty of options if you do want to try to like squeeze in an ace Digimon. You could technically use that same level of logic and space to run like a level 7 Digimon, but I feel like the deck really doesn't need any level 7s at all. I don't necessarily know if the deck needs like some of the hyper generic cards like Medieval Gallant. I mean, Medieval Gallant isn't a bad card. I just don't know if the deck actually needs it. He's still good to think about and keep in the back of your head. Any Floodgates is always really good to think about and keep in the back of your head. Also, when it comes to just some other generic staples, you could mess around with maybe playing some different tamers, like Analog Youth is still pretty good. Just being able to basically act like a good card to search out cards and put cards in our trash, which are things that the deck's already wanting to do. But you could kind of see, like, just as a small list of just hyper generic cards, again, outside of like the option, like the delay option suite, there's just a lot of different tools that we could think about incorporating. And again, it just comes down to that playtesting iteration as far as what's actually going to be good and beneficial for the deck in the long run based on the meta environment that you're expected to play with or against. I do apologize if these videos are a little bit less structured than some of my previous content. My previous content, I obviously knew a little bit more about the decks going into it, obviously coming off of like having Japanese data and being able to have more time to test and iterate on those decks because of the time lag. So I do apologize again if this feels a little bit more off the cuff, and that's because it mostly is just trying to get a base level of understanding for what these types of decks are doing and being able to prep in some capacity for them. And again, I'm by no means an expert on every single deck that I'm covering. This is just very fundamental basics on how I would go about deck building and figuring out what these cards are doing and how to best synergize what we already have with what's going to be coming out. But this is probably where I would consider starting with a Galacticmon deck if you're at least remotely interested in it. I do think it does have the potential to be a very solid tier 1 deck just because it has like a pseudo OTK, it has lots of protection, it has some decent tempo thanks to the absolutely broken Digicross ability that the Snatchmon and Destromon have. So, like, it's looking like it's going to be a very powerful deck. How powerful, I don't know. And as far as locking down the ratios, again, that's going to be up to playtesting and personal preference on where things are going to lie to be able to get the deck to perform the way you kind of want or intend it to perform. So this is a little bit shorter than the last one because I'm not like the biggest expert on it. I kind of just took the old version and then just saw and read some of the new cards and just was trying to update it. That's essentially the whole goal of what I was trying to do, just to try to get a little bit ahead of the curve on figuring out what to be able to do with these new cards for the latest iteration that had a semblance of success when it comes to how this deck is able to perform. So I think it's a very solid base and foundation. Please, again, this is not competitively ready. It needs lots of play testing. So feel free to take this, use this as the base, play test it, iterate from there. And I think this is going to be a very strong deck in the BT21 environment. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to give any suggestions about the deck down in the comments below. And as always, feel free to give your thoughts down there as well. And if you enjoyed this type of content, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me and help the channel out. And if you're enjoying this type of content and want to see more of it, you can always also hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date for when I upload or go live next. And with that, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you found this to be helpful and informative, and I'll see you in the next video.